You're going to need to forgive me if you start seeing me going a little funny. I'm one of those, a few crazy writers who thought it was okay to juggle the Goulburn Book Festival and Bad Sydney at the same time. So I literally just got out of my car about 15 minutes ago, but excited to be here. And so look, hello, welcome to Bad Sydney Crime Writers Festival. I'm sure you've heard that a few times already. This is one of the last events. And for all those joining us on Zoom, hello to you too. I just wanted to begin by acknowledging the traditional storytellers of the lands we're on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay respect to the elders past and present. My name is Tim Ayliffe, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the Metcalfe Auditorium today for our discussion with Jack Beaumont, to my left here, Matt Bevan, and up on Zoom there you've got Nick Stride. Before we get into it, and before I introduce these very impressive men in more detail, just if I can make sure everyone's phones are muted. If you're a social media user and you want to post pictures and things on Facebook and Instagram, or that sewer known as X, at Bad Crime Sydney is the handle, and hashtag Bad Crime Sydney as well. So look, we're not doing questions in the audience for various reasons. One being, Nick's up there and we've got a lot to talk about today, so hope that's okay with you. So now to our session, Spies in Truth and Fiction. Matt Bevan is the host and writer of the award-winning ABC News podcast, If You're Listening. He's been shortlisted for Walkleys and been Radio Times Podcast Host of the Year. He's here because of his explainer-style podcast has been diving deep into the global spy game, so he knows a bit about it. So welcome, Matt. Jack Beaumont is the pen name for the former French spy, like John le Carré, who turned his hand to writing spy thrillers to explore the tumult of our times and give readers a real-life understanding of the modern spy, away from the James Bond caricature. His debut, The Frenchman, was a global hit, and his follow-up, Dark Arena, is just as good, and there's another one on the way for early next year, I'm told, which is super exciting. So welcome, Jack. And Nick Stride worked in the construction industry and took a job in Moscow working on the home of a powerful Russian politician before he felt he knew too much and had to flee. Run for Your Life is his great escape story, written with Sue Williams, and Nick joins us from New Zealand. So welcome, Nick.
Thank you.
So I just want to let you know, I'm going to structure this conversation a little bit differently today because we've got three very different writers here and guests. So I'm going to spend a bit of time with each one first before I open it up a little bit more. So I want to start with you, Nick, just so we can get a bit of the lay of the land as well. So who is Igor Shuvalov, and why is he a man to be feared?
Igor Shuvalov, when I started working for him, he was the Deputy Prime Minister of Russia. I know him personally, but not intimately. But I know enough. He's quite a ruthless and vindictive person. When I first met him, he seemed like, I didn't even know he spoke English, because this is a very much a Russian thing. Is they actually won't speak English in front of an English person because it makes him lesser than you. So it wasn't until after 2 years I actually found out he spoke English. But he was next in line to Putin, and in fact he was actually going to be the next president, but for whatever reason Medvedev came in. So he's a huge player in Russia.
And Nick, how did you end up working for him?
I worked in Moscow for working on the new British Embassy in Smolenskaya, and the company that was the English company that was working, they had this second project, which was about 5 years later, which was for Igor Shuvalov. And because I could live in Russia and spoke Russian, I was kind of like the ideal candidate to carry on and project manage that job.
But your tradecraft, your trade in construction, was you're a glazier, is that right?
Yeah, so we do what's called bolted glass. It's a specialised glazing system in the glazing industry.
And so what was it like for you during that time? So just to remind everyone of the years we're talking about, and What was it like being an Englishman in Moscow at that time?
At that time, because I've been out there before in 1998, which was completely different when I went back to work for Igor in 2005. In 2098, it had just come out of the communist system. It was a crazy place. There was nothing like it. Um, it was so far from the UK, for obvious reasons. The language is completely different. The metro stations, you couldn't read the signs. I didn't speak Russian then. It's an extremely dangerous place to live because they saw every foreigner as money. So where me and my ex-wife, we lived in a place called Leningrad, is I used to get a bus there from Moscow. And from that bus journey to me getting into the apartment, I could not speak English and could not speak Russian because as soon as they found out there was a foreigner, you then become a target. And at that time, it was like the murder capital of the world. And being a foreigner just puts you right up there with with the number one target because they just think that you've got money. So going back in 2005, it was a little bit different. What Putin brought in was a middle class. There was a bit more money going into Moscow, so it was a little bit less dangerous.
So, but give us a sense though. So for you, I guess looking over your shoulder, I mean, what are the things when you're running this big project? There were people watching you and interested in what you were doing. Did you feel that constantly, or is it something that built up over time?
No, from the word go, I mean, you're working for the deputy prime minister. I mean, Russians are paranoid, probably more so than the English, but from the word go, security was extreme. We had to walk from like my office up to the path onto site. If you literally went off the path by just a few meters, the security would appear from nowhere. They had cameras everywhere. You're only allowed to walk to and from where you're supposed to be working. The more time I spent on the project and the more that I was opened up into helping the client's people, the more freedom I got on there. But they'd be quite intimidating. I'd have the head of Russian security get on the bus with me in the morning when I was going to work, which was pretty unusual because he has a chauffeur-driven car. So what he was doing on a public bus, and he come up to me, he just said, he goes, "You like playing rugby?" I was, "Yeah." And he says, "Number 12 for Stoneham." I says, "Yeah." And he was just trying to inform me they know everything about me, what position I played in rugby, where I lived, and they just leak this information just to keep you on your toes. I think just to make you aware of, who you are and where you are and who you're working for.
And then, so I do want to get to the point. When did you feel like you needed to get out of there? But you were looking at work in a neighbouring country, weren't you? And that sort of started okay, how am I going to get out of here, and what am I going to do? So run us through that. I mean, you had an almost really big meeting happening.
Yeah, I was actually invited by the then president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili, to go run a lot of the government projects in construction in Georgia. So I was invited to Batumi, but the border between Russia and Georgia was there was no travel because of the Georgian invasion and the Russian return invasion of Gore. So the border, it was a closed border. So I had to fly through Armenia to get to Georgia. And that set off alarm bells because I was not only the only foreigner on an airplane to Georgia, I was the only person with a indirect flight through Armenia to Georgia. So I think the client people found out that I was going to Georgia, and that made them very suspicious. And it didn't help that I actually told the client's people that I was going to Spain to see my parents, which was a pretty basically stupid move because I knew they'd find out really. So when I came back from that, just the attitude just darkened quite a bit, and I had to renew my visas for me and my children, my Russian visa every 4 months. And the next time that I went back, the client's people turned around and said, or one of the client's top men turned around and said, "You're going without your wife." And I said, "No." She's going, "No, you're going without your wife. You and your kids can go back. She stays here." And when you know the capabilities of these people, it's hard for maybe other people to understand how threatening that can be. But when Shuvalos people tell you, you do it.
Right, I'm going to come back to you, Nick, because I want to pick up effectively on where we are in that story and you getting out and then, you know, the why Australia. But I want to bring in Jack Beaumont, and thanks for sharing that with us, Nick, because I know it's tough looking back at some of that stuff, and the book is terrific for those that are interested in reading it. Jack, your path to the intelligence world. We've spoken about this before, but I really want to go through it again because it's fascinating. You're a fighter pilot, and you had a great career as a fighter pilot until you had a pretty big accident. Talk us through, you know, what you're doing in the military and then this accident, because when you crash a car, it's okay. But when you're in a fighter plane, it's a bit of a different sort of situation we're talking about.
Yeah, well, first, sorry for my accent. Obviously, I'm French. So, what happened is I joined the Air Force very young, after 2 years of mathematics and physics engineering, and became a fighter pilot, flying single-seaters for dogfight at 21. So I did my first deployment at 21 years old, and everything was going well. As you just said, Tim, I mean, I was enjoying my job a lot. And one day I was having a training dogfight over France, and I don't know if everyone is familiar with the G-force, but it's the amount of time you weigh your own weight in a jet when you turn, basically. And in a fighter jet, especially for dogfights, each turn we take 9 Gs, so 9 times our weight. But if you pull more than 42 kilos on the stick, then you can go up to 12 Gs, which is massive. Because at 9 Gs, you have the heart goes down of 6-7 centimeters in the chest. The brain is like a pancake. You have that's why we have no brain. And you have all the blood going down to your legs. And that's why we have the anti-G suits to do external counter pressure to push the blood up to the heart and the brain, not to faint. And I was doing this training dogfight. I was a bit, let's say I forgot about my speed, and the fastest you go, the more Gs you take. And I had this guy coming behind me, falling on me, and so the only thing I could do to not get killed was to do a very severe turn, but I was twisted in my seat, and I was to keep the visual on him. And so without even realizing it, because of the adrenaline, I've been pulling those 42 kilos, and I've been up to 11.3 Gs, but looking behind. So basically putting roughly around 650 kilos on my lower back, but twisted. So it has been popping out 3 discs on the lower back immediately, and so the pain was pretty intense. And my left leg was paralyzed, and because all the nerves were pinched. And the problem is when you land a plane like this, a fighter jet, you control the front wheel with the legs, and you brake on the top of the feet. But my left leg was not working anymore. So it was nice weather, no wind, nothing. The flight director told me to go and basically eject in the specific area, telling me you're going to kill yourself when you're going to land, because you won't be able to keep the axe of the runway, and you won't be able to brake. And as I had a back injury, I knew that the ejection would have been lethal to me, or at least put me in the chair for the rest of my life. So I decided to try to land the plane. I had this brilliant idea on the paper, which was just on the paper, which was to leave my right leg smooth as well, and basically press with my 2 hands on my knees to try to control the front wheel. But of course, it didn't work. So I landed.
Just while you're describing this, what's the plane worth again?
80 million euros.
80 million. Okay. No pressure. And you're pushing down with your hands.
Yeah,
good idea.
It was a good idea. It was a good idea.
Yeah.
It was. I was very proud of my idea.
Yeah. Oh, man.
And so when we land like this, in case of emergency, we land at 180 knots. So it's roughly 320, 340 k per hour. So I landed, and then I tried my trick. It didn't work. Only my right leg had been braking, and so the plane went on the right side of the runway, hitting the grass. The landing gear went in, and I just had the time to push down all the contact to cut the hydraulic, electric, fuel, etc., and the engine. And then the plane went on a fireball on the right side of the runway, on a few hundred meters. So I don't remember anything, of course. I had my helmet exploded. I had all the left side broken in the plane. It took the firemen a bit more than 2 hours to take me out of the canopy. And I woke up after the surgery at the hospital. Yeah.
Amazing. And the plane didn't make it.
No, didn't make it.
No.
But it was cannibalized, you know.
Yeah,
You can recover a lot.
Yeah, of course. Lots of,
lots of
like
pieces. And there were plenty
70
of pieces.
million worth, maybe?
Plenty of
Yeah.
pieces everywhere, so
Yeah.
very easy to collect.
Yeah. So they became collector's
Lego.
items. Yeah, just like Lego. So, look, I mean, we're making light of it, but extraordinary that you managed to, land or crash the plane and survive. But so, this led you into a different path, because then you still wanted to be in the armed forces. So talk to about after your rehab and then moving into, okay, what can I do with my career now? I mean, how old were you at the time? You were only about
I
late
was
20s, weren't you?
I was late 20s, reaching 30. And so no, first after the surgery, so I was back in a jet 2 months after the surgery. I signed the waiver, because the military doctors, because of the cost of training for a fighter pilot, if you want to continue to fly, they're very happy about it. And so, but they say, look, you have to be aware that you're going to fly without any exit doors, because if you eject, you're going to be in the chair and paralyzed for the rest of your life. So that's your call. And of course, I was young and clever, and I said, oh yeah, well, give me the paper. So I signed it. So I was back in a jet, but the G-force, each time I was pulling 9 Gs, the pain. So I ended up with painkillers in the morning, painkillers before the flight, painkillers after the flight, painkillers at night, and so I decided to put my hand up and say, well, that's maybe it's good time to stop. But if I stop, I want to do something sexy and rock and roll. I don't want to. I want to be retrained as something, and they came back to me saying, well, there is one position if you want as a pilot for special forces. So all the clandestine operations, and at that time it was mainly for the hunt of the Serbian war criminals. So illegal landing on roads, on fields by night, with night vision goggles, very short takeoff, very short landing to pick up some guys, drop some guys. So that's what I did. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And flying lower than the trees by night, it was quite
In quite big planes.
No, it's small planes.
Small planes.
Yeah, small planes. So TBM 700, Cessna Caravan, and twin otter. So very short takeoff, short landing.
Okay.
And at some point, the people I had in the back at the beginning were dressed not in uniform but like military guys. And after a moment, I started to have some guys at the back dressed in jean and sneakers. So I thought, well, that's funny. That's not usual uniform. And I realized, of course, that they were from the Secret Service,
The DGSE.
DGSE, which is like the equivalent of the French CIA. Or MI6. Difference is that we don't have any Aston Martins, we have a Peugeot. And so they became mates basically. And then I had a survival training, high altitude in the Alps, because I was meant to go and do the same for Bin Laden in Afghanistan. And so the game of this training is you're dropped at the back of the mountain by yourself in the snow, and you have to survive for 5 days by yourself. Meanwhile, a team of commandos with dogs are chasing you and trying to catch you. And if you get caught before the end of the 5 days, then you're going to spend a week in interrogation cell. So you don't want to get caught. And so I was well hidden in the middle of nowhere, and I was digging my igloo. And the snow is very heavy on the spade, and I did this stupid movement of twisting myself, and one disc popped out again, And so I had to start to walk down the mountain by myself by night, of course. Otherwise, it's not funny. So with the pain,
No one thinks this is funny, mate.
and then I saw the lights of those guys, at the bottom, and I dropped a flare, and they came and picked me up. I had a second surgery in the back, and then the military doctor said, "Well, you can't fly in the military anymore. You keep your commercial, ability to medical clearance to fly." So you can be a commercial pilot, but at that time I didn't want, and still I didn't want to. No offense to commercial pilots, I didn't want to drive a truck, and so I was stuck. I didn't know what to do, and that's where one of those guys I used to have in the back had a lunch with him in Paris, and he said, "Why don't you try to join us?" And that's how everything started.
Wow. You see, every time you mentioned your spine, everyone in the room just went, ooh. But anyway, I did too. So I'm going to come back to you. But look, Matt, you haven't been a fighter pilot or a spy.
I kind of just want to keep hearing their stories.
Yeah.
The most interesting thing, like I have, bulged a disc as well, pulling weeds in my yard in Newcastle.
I have too. Yeah. Look, we are all of the age now where we're doing it, but just not as, elite.
No.
But look, you haven't annoyed one of Russia's most powerful men either. But I've got a different question for you because
I've been trying.
Yeah. Well, no, you've probably done an okay job of it through the podcast. But just give us a sense of the modern spy game. It's not the KGB anymore. What agencies and players are out there, like Wagner Group?
Well, look, it's really interesting. In our podcast, we can only really talk about people who aren't very good at their job in terms of spying, because if they're good at their job, then we don't really know about it. So we talk a lot about assassination attempts or successful assassinations that were successful in killing the person, but not successful in terms of us not knowing who did it and how they did it. One of the really interesting things that I've observed in my coverage is that one of the biggest challenges for spy agencies these days is the exact same thing that is also helping them, which is the enormous amount of surveillance and the enormous amount of security procedures that surround global travel and getting from place to place, and the amount of surveillance. I mean, we did this story recently about an Israeli operation that did not go particularly well. They did manage to kill the guy that they were after in Dubai, but basically it was so difficult for them to forge passports that the team were easily able to be identified because they kept going in to Dubai over and over on these same passports, and it was really easy to figure out who it was and who did it. And then once they did that, they could watch the entire operation play out on CCTV footage. And that's so much the case in so many of the cases where, so many of the famous assassination attempts and big operations that have happened in recent years, is you can see so much of it happen in front of us. And that is so much the case as well with the big story that has come out over the last, particularly late last year, which was of course the Wagner Group, which isn't a spy operation. They're a private security company, but they were the most spectacular group that was out pulling off extraordinary operations in Africa and in Ukraine and in parts of Europe, and of course they got too big for their boots. They got into trying to up them, make a big name for themselves on social media. The leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, became a social media star. He wanted to be the most prominent, person in the Russian military. He was critical of the Russian military, and then he decided to launch a coup attempt against the Russian military, and it didn't go very well for him. So he's dead now, in case you didn't... his plane crashed. Weird.
Really?
Weirdly, his plane exploded midair. I mean, what are the odds of that? And
Someone,
all of his...
Someone burned the toast.
Yeah, no, yeah. And all of his other commanders were in there as well. Weird. But anyway, so it was... that's what, we cover is bad spies and people who want... people who are doing espionage or assassinations or security operations that could potentially be done in secret, but either due to their incompetence or their bravado, we know what happened and we can see so much about it. So it's been, I've really enjoyed over the last few years getting to know what can go wrong when these operations fall apart. The story that really got me into it was the story of Alexander Litvinenko, which was an assassination that took place in London of a Russian defector in 2006. The Russians, for whatever reason, decided to make the most public assassination attempt imaginable. They decided to kill this man with a radioactive cup of tea. So they brought a polonium-210 solution from a nuclear power station in Russia. They brought it into the UK. They brought enough of it potentially to kill 50 million people. Their target was only one guy, but the fact is that their container was leaky, so they left a radioactive trail on their plane seat, in the taxi, in their hotel room. They went to a strip club. We know that because there was part of the strip club that was radioactive. They went around dressed like Russian gangsters to the level that a woman in a lift that they were in, they were in a lift. The lift was in a hotel. Just kept stopping. The woman turns around. Are you doing the KGB? She says to them. And anyway, they're just like, what's happened? And they also took 2 attempts to kill Litvinenko because they poisoned a cup of tea and he didn't drink it. And then they had to have another go at it. They left a trail of radiation into the UK and then back out, and then into it again and then back out. They flushed the polonium down the sink in their hotel. They then tried to wipe it all up with a towel, which they then just put in the bin. That's the most radioactive towel in history. But the thing is that the point of that wasn't to surreptitiously kill this man. The point was to say, don't defect.
It's the brazenness.
It is the brazenness.
A message.
Yeah. Mind you, those 2 assassins both ended up in a Moscow hospital with radiation poisoning.
It's funny, funny that. I want to go back to Nick Stride. So Nick, so we got up to the point where you're back in Moscow and you feel like there's suspicion around you, but then you managed to get some trust back that then helped you with my escape plan to get my family out of here. So talk us through how that unfolded, and then I guess the question is then why Australia?
Yeah, so when I got back from Georgia, it was a very different situation, and they were stopping my wife's movement in and out of Russia, and then they stopped my children's movement, so they refused my children's exit of Russia. At that point, me and my ex-wife Luda, we said, that's it, we've got to go. And our only option then was maybe going overland into Ukraine, maybe Belarus. But if we actually got caught at the border, they'd be asking why we're there. So we had to find a more legitimate and safer way. So I'd go to the client's people and I just said to the client's main man, Vitaly, I said, I've had enough. Just give me a Russian passport. I'm sick of this. And I repeated that every day. I'd go and just give me a passport. And he'd just turn around and say, the grass is not always green on the other side. And I said, just give me a passport. My kids are in school here. I've got a Russian wife. I hate the UK. And I just kept on. And then finally, a huge job come out in a tax-free region in the far east of Russia. And I said, I want that job. And he says, well, we need you out there. I said, no, that's my job. That's what I've wanted. And I've told you, and I've been telling you, that's what I want. And it got to a point where he actually started to believe that I was legitimately wanting to live in Russia forever. Because I think their worry was not so much what I knew, but the client was probably thinking, he doesn't actually know what I know. So, that could have been far more than what I was aware of with his financial dealings. And it got to a point where he started to trust me. their people started to trust me again. And I said, right, I'm doing a visa run. I've got to take Luda back to the UK. We're going to say goodbye to everyone, my family, and then we're coming back to Russia. That's it. We're staying. And he just turned around. I mean, at that point, I hadn't really done anything wrong. I just annoyed them. So he agreed. And at that second, we thought, that's it. That's our chance to get out, And then this took like 4 or 5 months to actually convince him. So my plan was to fly back to the UK. So I'd leave a trail just going back to the UK. Then when I landed in the UK, we bought 4 tickets to Australia. And the reason for Australia is London is just full of super rich Russians. Igor Shuvalov, he bought part of the Queen's residence. The England are harboring these people and were harboring them and using their money for the benefit of the country. That, I can understand. And I'm a nobody. And when you're no one, that makes it very dangerous for you because nobody's disappeared without a trace. So we flew to Australia and to try and create a separate link of where we gone. So here, just think that I was in the UK. But if I'd have stayed in the UK, then I'd be looking over my shoulder because, I have some knowledge of the financial dealings about his place in the UK, and I'll always be some sort of threat to him. So Australia just seemed the furthest place I could get away from everyone.
Well, the Deputy Prime Minister of Russia is a well-paid job. I mean, you've got access to some, funds that others wouldn't have. So what do you reckon he was worth around that time?
There's I used to have this discussion all the time with Luda, my ex. But it's not what he's worth; it's what others above him are worth. Because if he can afford to waste $200 million on a frivolous Dacia, Putin must only have like 10-20% of what Putin has. Where does that put him? If you can spend 200 million and not worry about it, how much do you have in reserve? The amounts of money are enormous, and their arrogance is unreal, especially around money. We'd see money come in a sports bag, and there'd be $1 million US dollars in a sports bag, and it just goes into the back office, into a safe, or sometimes not even a safe. They know no one's going to steal from them because you're not going to last long if you steal from them.
Jack, like Le Carré, your books are very close to real life. You're in a unique position to be able to do that, unlike other people writing spy novels. How important is getting the intricacy right about the spy game, and then also your mates that you used to work with? I mean, what do they think about the books?
Well, first, it's a novel. It's not, I didn't
of course.
write. Because you have some people leaving the services and they decide to write a book about what they did, and that's a massive mistake. It's a massive mistake for several reasons. The first one being that when you work in intelligence, you never have the full picture of the operation. You only have in your mind one piece of the puzzle. And by talking about that piece of the puzzle, you might, even without knowing it or realizing it, reveal some other people or maybe an operation which is still on, and put some people at risk. And so the game for me was absolutely not to reveal some high state secrets, to put any of my mates still in the company at risk. It was really for a real pure personal cathartic process because of the PTSD I had, to express this through a book, which had to be a novel. And so because it's a novel, it doesn't need to be vetted by the company. But still, they read the manuscript and they came back with a few things of the spycraft saying, well, maybe this, But I made sure before writing it that everything I wanted to put in was already in open sources, so that I was not the first one revealing it. So that was very important. But what I wanted to address was the psychological aspect of being a spy, and the fact that 90-95% of us are married with kids. And so how do how are you a spy during the day and the night, or a few days or a few weeks, and clearly going on the very dark side of the things, and lead some very offensive clandestine operations, and then you come back home and you have daddy, you know, and and you have been someone else for, you know, a few days, few weeks. I was having 5 different IDs all the time, on which I was turning with you know, 10 to 13 different operations in the same time. So you end up coming back home and you play the game of who you really are, the same way you've been playing the game of your false identity for a few weeks. So you start to really totally lose track of who you are, and lose yourself in a way. And of course, the level of paranoia is very high. So usually, divorce is the rule. We have the highest rate of suicide in the whole, you know, French armed forces. Alcoholism, of course. So all this, I wanted to address this, and I needed the plot, highly realistic, and the spycraft, highly realistic, to express all those feelings.
And on the family question, and so when you're coming back from an operation, when Ayliffe Depayne is coming back from an operation, so and you see it in the book, that he would, and these are the spycraft things that I've loved in your books, that the details there, that, you know, you're getting off the plane, you're not ever going directly home. You've got to basically wash the path, or whatever, which way you describe it. And also that paranoia you spoke about. Give us a bit more about that, because, you know, you're with all of the things you see out there, I guess, in what we'd call the darkness. Then coming home and just thinking about, okay, I want to be a family man with my wife and kids now. What I've loved about your first 2 books, and the world that you're sharing with us in fiction, is that you've given us so much about that impact on the family, on the individual, and I don't really recall other spy writers doing that. So it's quite unique on that front. I really like it. But is it cathartic for you to do that, or is that just important in the realism?
First, it's for the first part of the question. It's every day. It's every day and every second, because the like Nick, the bad guys you've been fighting. When you're a fighter pilot and you go to you know, Bosnia, Kosovo, Iraq, Afghanistan, this kind of stuff, and then you come back, you're on holidays for 2 weeks. The guys you've been fighting against, they're not going to come and hunt you, you know, at home while you're on holidays. In intelligence, it just never stops. So the bad guys you've been fighting against, they're not, of course, the ultimate goal is to identify who you really are, and as soon as they manage to do it, they're going to come for your family. And so the first thing you really have to do is to protect your family, but every day, every second, because they're not going to stop because it's Sunday, right? So you have to check all the time, every morning, several times a day, if you're not followed, take different itineraries where you're living, and the level of paranoia, you know, goes really high, and so you start to see what we call blue rats. So you start to, you know, visualize people who are not there, like the old lady with a, you know, a plastic bag behind you. She must be a Russian spy, you know. It becomes really unbearable for your wife, because you can't do anything. You totally isolate the whole family. You don't see anyone. You don't talk to anyone. So all this, I started to write for the cathartic process, and it was really good. It really helped me on the Frenchman. Helped me as well on Dark Arena. But what I'm doing right now, talking about it and doing interviews or podcasts, actually takes everything back to the surface, and have a kind of, you know, counter effect. And it's for your question about when we arrive from another country, an operation. Yes, no one comes and pick us up, because on the other side, if they are clever, they're gonna put a welcoming dispositive, some people at the arrival, to see who's coming to pick you up, if there is a car, what kind of car, the ID plate, where you're going, follow you, etc. So you go in public transport and lose yourself basically for a few days in Paris suburbs until you come back, specific day, specific time, specific place. And a backup team will check if you're not followed and then pick you up on a bike or on a car in the middle of the streets to take you back to the debriefing. And that's the beginning of my second book, Dark Arena. A guy of my team was really tired. He came back from a country not too far, Nick's friends, he went down to the train, from Paris airport, and there was a strike, like usual in France. So there was a strike, and so he didn't want to wait. He was tired. He didn't want to wait for 50 minutes. So he decided, fuck it, and he went back up and take a taxi, and he went straight home. And 2 weeks after, he walked out of the headquarters of the company, arrived home, and his wife and his daughter of 11 years old were on their knees with a gun on the forehead.
This is in the book we're talking about. Thanks for sharing that. And also, look, I do know it's quite honest and raw for you, so I appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us on this today. Matt, I want to go to you. Before I go back to Nick Stride, we talked about the dollars, the money. And these deals that the UK are just allowing. You got money, you hit a certain amount, welcome, come in to London. What sort of money are we talking about? How much Russian money is there in London?
Well, unbelievable. Well, less than there used to be. I think it's pretty clear that it's become a little bit more unpalatable in the wake of particularly the failed assassination attempt on Sergei Skripal in 2018, where one of the amazing things was Boris Johnson, who was the foreign minister at the time, obviously, had, while he was Mayor of London, been extremely embracing of London's Russian community and talking about how it was the truckloads of rubles ending up in the pockets of our tradesmen and of our hospitality staff, and it's keeping the engine of London running, is the way that this, so it's very positive that all these Russian oligarchs are operating in the UK and particularly in London, and that was why many people were unbelievably frustrated by the lack of action against Russia following the assassination of Alexander Litvinenko. But in the intervening 12 years between those two incredibly high-profile assassinations, there were 14. BuzzFeed ran a massive investigation into this that they spent years and years on, back when BuzzFeed had a news department. They uncovered a pattern of 14 people connected with either Litvinenko or a dissident Russian oligarch named Boris Berezovsky, who all died in mysterious and strange circumstances. Some of them seem to have, died in a suicide attempt, some in accidents, some very obviously not in accidents. One body was found in a suitcase. That doesn't tend to happen by accident. And so it was something that was consistently being ignored by the British government for 12 years, up until, suddenly they had ignored it for so long that they had nerve agent on the streets of Salisbury spread by two gentlemen who described themselves as, they described themselves as supplement salesmen with an affinity for Gothic architecture, brackets, very straight. They wanted to make it clear that these two men who were supplement salesmen, according to them, had travelled to Salisbury because they wanted to see Salisbury Cathedral, which is a beautiful building. Of course, there's no old architecture in Russia. Anyway, but they said that they were fans of Gothic architecture, and so they came to see the cathedral. But that did not make them gay. They wanted to make that clear, because that's very important in Russia. But after that, Boris Johnson, who had been for so many years an enabler, or at least turning a blind eye to what was going on, really turned on a dime and became extremely critical of Putin directly, and of the Kremlin, and of the GRU, and of the FSB, and he went on and on and on about this all the way to Downing Street, and then you'll recall he was one of, if not the first world leader to visit Kyiv after the beginning of the war on Russia. So the war against Russia. So Boris Johnson, at least, shifted gears, and since then it has become, since the sanctions were slapped on after the beginning of that invasion, it has become a lot more difficult for Russian oligarchs to do business there. But there are still Russian oligarchs that own Premier League teams, so there's still plenty of rubles washing around through the British economy.
Nick Stride, I want to go back to you because part of your book, and it will talk about the impact on family. We just heard Jack Beaumont talking about that. But for you, coming to Australia, your experience with immigration, and then this extraordinary period of time you spent literally on the run, like hiding in far north of Western Australia. We've spoken about this, that previously, that you look back on some of the decisions you made and you go, oh, wow, I might have done it differently. But the reality and the truth of it all is that, you're quite desperate. You're trying to get your family to safety. And so you're here asking for help from immigration. They weren't that helpful, were they?
No. Again, I've spoken with my family this point over and over why they weren't helpful. I think to acknowledge that Igor Shuvalov was corrupt would mean that Australia would have to deal with him in a different manner. And I think it was a lot easier for them to basically, stamp on us. And the same with the UK. We've been turned down by the UK numerous times when we've asked for help. We've just been left out to dry. And the fear is real. I mean, I don't consider myself like some huge target, but the people that I used to work for and the information that I gave to Michael Weiss, the investigative journalist, I'm no expert. He used that information. And there's links, there's a balance of power with the politicians, the oligarchs, and organized crime. And it's really that sector, the organized crime, which is probably the biggest threat to me, because they really don't care. I've seen things in Russia. You could write a book about. It's like it is a mad, bad, and dangerous place to go. There's no doubt. They're absolutely ruthless. And when I was given protection in New Zealand, one of the things is what percentage do you think that you're in fear of? And if I was to walk out my house now, there's a 1% chance I'll be bitten by a dog. I think, I'm not going to worry about that. But when that 1% chance becomes, are you going to become a victim from the Deputy Prime Minister, organised crime, some of the biggest organised crime groups in the world, then that 1% suddenly becomes huge. And when I was receiving phone calls and death threats from Russians when I first entered Australia, you've got to take it seriously. You spoke earlier, I think, about being paranoid. And I like to think I am paranoid. And I think that's what keeps you safe. I don't think you can be over paranoid when you're in a situation which deserves at least some sort of paranoia, because these people, they don't have empathy. They will wait as well. I'll be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. I know that. I don't allow it to affect the way I live now. But then, I will be looking over my shoulder for a long time. It's something that I deal with.
It's not paranoia if they really are coming to get you, as they like to say.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Nick, why didn't you try to go to Israel? Because the Russian services have a very hard time working in Israel, and much harder for them to come and grab someone in Israel than in New Zealand.
At the time I left Moscow, I really hadn't upset them a great deal. As far as what they were concerned, I think they were, again, from Igor Shuvalov's point of view, he didn't know what information I had. So he would have suspected the worst. because I had access to a lot of his financial department and team, because they were just so terrible at business. So Australia just seemed the natural thing. It was a place I've been to before. They obviously speak English to a certain degree, although Luna did find a lot of the Australian very difficult, but I helped her out, mate. But Australia just seemed the simple answer. And again, I hadn't actually given the information to Michael Weiss at that time. So it wasn't until that happened that the threats became a lot more sort of exaggerated, because the day before, I think it was in 2014, when his report went online, he phoned me up and he said, look, we don't know what the fallout is going to be from the Shavalov camp. He goes, but if I was you, sorry.
Thanks for sharing this, Nick. I know.
Oh, sorry, I'll get it. I sometimes can't get past this point.
No, that's okay.
He said, sorry, he goes, if I was you, I'd find the deepest hole as far away from anyone as possible. And we thought, yeah, the Kimberley, that's about as far away as possible as you can get from anybody. And, you know, again, I'm no expert. If someone like Michael Weiss is telling me you need to get out of there, you know, you've got to take notice of that. Being paranoid or not paranoid, you've got to get yourself out. So, you know, that was a point when our lives really changed.
On the Kimberley, I found extraordinary in your book your skills, and particularly your son Michael's skills, and Anya as well, in terms of like survival and catching like animals or fishing. And I was reading it just thinking that's why this book is very much there's three big tranches in a way. It's the Russia getting out, surviving in Australia, and you know obviously your love and devotion to your children. But what was it like in the community right up there? Because the communities up there embraced you as well.
Yeah, one of the most fantastic things, and you know, although it was a tough experience at times, there's no doubt. You know, there were days when we had it's a fantastic place. It's a beautiful place. The community accepted us. They didn't ask where we come from, you know, what we're doing up there. Most people that end up in a place like that are running from something, you know, so no one asked questions. And there weren't many non-indigenous up there, so they kind of welcomed us with open arms and open hearts, basically. But it did take about 2 years before they really started to trust us. And I remember one of the Aboriginals, I think it was from Beagle Bay, he turned around, he said to me, he goes, Nick, he goes, you've been here 2 years. He goes, it's time we can let you into some secrets. And he brought some elders in and they started talking about poison berries, how to kill animals. And we were just soaking it up because it was just our life then. And the strange thing is when you live in a remote place, civilization just disappears almost, you know, instantly. You don't need internet, you don't need phones, you don't need clothes. Everything just gets left behind when your priority is like, you need to go catch a fish. You know, you need to like feed the family first. So that all goes out the window. And when we spent the time on the beach, when you know we just sort of said goodbye to everyone. We're expecting immigration to come and get us. I told them that's it, we've had enough. I gave them the latitude and longitude where we are, just in case they got lost coming to find us, and they just never came. And we was expecting to be on this beach for just a matter of weeks before immigration were going to detain us, but they just refused to correspond, and we stayed on that beach for 5 months. But by then, we'd already learned how to survive. And I remember saying to Luders, like, we could go back to Broome and live in a town. And she was going, but how are we going to do that? We can't live on the street. But we knew how to live in the bush. So that became our only option was to live in the bush.
Thanks, Nick. It's like amazing story, and I'd encourage all of you to get a copy of the book. And thanks for sharing that stuff so honestly too. I've got time for another couple of questions with you two here with me. I want to just go to you first, Jack. I know that you've got the Ukraine war as the kind of backdrop, the threat of with Dark Arena. Should we have been surprised if we're thinking about Putin and what we've known about this man and Russia, him rebuilding Russia in his image post the fall of the Berlin Wall? Should we have been surprised?
No, I don't think so. So the thing is, when I wrote Dark Arena, I wrote it just after the Frenchman, and so it was I started in 2021, basically. And I wanted to address all the gas battle on the Med Sea. So I wrote this, 21, 22. And my ending was, Putin invading Ukraine. And then it did happen. And so the publisher calls me and said, well, you have to find a new ending. So I said, okay. So I thought about new ending, which I wrote early 2023. And I'm not going to spoil the end of the book, but it did happen. And it did happen when the book was already printed. So the publisher said, well, let's publish the book, And now people saying, you wrote it really fast, So, well, actually not, I wrote it before. But so the thing is, I guess that from the Orange Revolution, the Ukrainian Revolution, from that point on, we knew because of Nord Stream 1, because of how Ukraine had the tap of Nord Stream 1 to feed Europe with gas, how the Donbass people were actually not asking for independence, they were asking for to keep Russian as the second language, official language. When the nationalist Ukrainian wanted everyone to speak only Ukrainian and not Russian anymore, and so they've been sending people in the Donbass to kill, the people in the Donbass because they refuse to be Ukrainian. The international community started to of course, be shocked with that, and that's where you had the Minsk agreement, France and Germany actually were meant to oversee the Minsk agreement and make sure that they were stopping the strikes in the Donbass. And Ukraine said, "What? I've got the gas tap, and you want to tell me how to do my internal politics?" And so France and Germany were like, looking away. And they continued to strike the Donbass, and those people in the Donbass had no other choice than to turn on the other side, and which made Putin very happy, and say we need some help, and that's where he's been sending the little green men, and that's where the Mariupol guys of Azov, which was not National Guard at that time, started to go and fight the green men in the Donbass. So we knew because of those energy issues and Nord Stream 2, which was coming, the US becoming one of the major, shale gas producer. They wanted to find an export market. And of course, Europe was the export market. And so they had to stop Russia from import the gas in Europe. Germany was playing a double, triple game because they had Nord Stream 2 arriving in Germany. So they were happy to cut Nord Stream 1. But they made some deal with the US also before, So all this was coming into place, and we knew that it would happen at some point, but maybe not at that point, but we knew it would happen.
Is your crystal ball gazing specific to international events? Because I think race 9's about to run at Randwick, and I'm wondering if you got any. Anyway.
No, actually, number 3 is on Chinese cyber.
Oh, all right. So, I'm going to have to wrap this up, so I don't know. I got one more question for Matt Bevan here, because it was the subject of one of your podcasts recently. Mossad was behind an extraordinary assassination only a couple of months ago. Just neatly, give us a little rundown of this, because it's an incredible story.
I mean, it was something that it was extraordinary because, as I was saying earlier, this assassination in Dubai, where they got caught, so many of their allies were extremely upset about the whole situation. Basically, the outcome of that was that Israel was not really able to assassinate people in Arab states anymore, because they were also trying to build a bit of support from those states at the same time. And so the Hamas guys parked themselves in Qatar for the better part of for many years. But little did Hamas know that Mossad had extraordinary operations, it turns out, in Iran. So the political leader of Hamas went for a visit to Iran for the inauguration of the new president of Iran after the old president died in a helicopter crash, which seems to have been entirely a freak accident. I'm not spinning anything on that. It was just a really old, crappy helicopter. But that gave Mossad a date that they knew that this man was going to be in Tehran. They managed to infiltrate the building that he was going to be staying in. They had a couple of guards that they managed to convince to plant a bomb in exchange for a ticket out of there and a fat stack of cash. And it's a little bit unclear when they planted the bomb. There was some reporting that indicated that they planted the bomb weeks and weeks before the attack took place, but then there's other reporting that indicates it was only a few hours. But they managed to have a bomb under this man's bed, which is an extraordinary achievement of an intelligence service, and terrifying, I would have thought, for anyone who wants to mess with Mossad. But they blew up this corner of this building, and they killed him and his bodyguard. And the message is, don't mess with us. But I don't necessarily think that it's going to stop people in Mossad messing with them, but it might make people in Iran a bit more hesitant about messing with Israel if they know that Israel has the potential to assassinate people inside a complex run by the Revolutionary Guard Corps right next to the presidential palace. I mean, it was an extraordinary operation. It also, in case it wasn't clear, Israel does not mess around. I think that's the message of the last year or so.
And it gives a totally different meaning to the words "lights out."
That's right.
But anyway, look, this time has really rocked along. It's been a great session. Nick Stride, huge thank you to you for sharing your story with us. I'd encourage you all, as I've said, his book is really worth reading. And Nick, we wish you all the best, and thank you again for sharing your story. Jack Beaumont, always love talking to you and reading your books. Thanks very much. Matt Bevan, I'll continue to listen to the podcast. I'm no longer at the ABC with you, but keep doing the great work you're doing.
You only listen for fun now.
That's it. And research. But it's been a lot of fun. Thank you to all. Thanks for the festival for having us.